So listen, thank you very much for the invitation to come tonight to talk us through. The challenge with any sort of technology presentation is that every single farm is an individual farm, and there is no one size fits all. And even in the technology report that we did, what we were trying to do there was to give a flavour of the type of technologies that are available, and to encourage people to explore what might be most appropriate for your farm. And so what we're going to really cover tonight, more than anything else, is a decision-making process that looks at the type of technologies that are available, and why you might consider some of them, and the decision-making process you should maybe undertake when you look at it. So fundamentally, what we're going to kind of cover is the need for technology, the short and long-term effects of technology, because that's a very interesting thing. The types of technology that we could consider for different types of farms, and then that decision-making process. But whenever you're actually going to implement or choose technology, and very importantly, we're also going to look a little bit at return on investment as well. And lastly, and it's something that is often missed, the whole aspect of training around some of the technologies to really get the maximum out of them. You're probably like me, most of us have phones, and we probably use about 4% of their capabilities. That's okay with the phone. It's probably much more challenging when it's a piece of agricultural equipment or something that could really make a huge difference to your farm profitability. So we're just very quickly starting with the whole aspect of sort of farming challenges, and why we might look at technology. And I will say this should take about 25 minutes is what was asked to cover, maybe 30, and then we'll go to some questions. But fundamentally, any type of application of technology should be to address, I suppose, areas where there is challenge. And we all know that farms find it difficult to attract the type of labour that they need at the minute. We also know that there's a real challenge around collecting data, analysing it, and using it to really actually identify where your farm or my farm can improve. I think thirdly, there's a real productivity challenge in some sectors. That's not true of all sectors, by the way, but the whole aspect of productivity is around increasing performance for the same inputs, or actually keeping performance the same but reducing the inputs, so that essentially, that could be feed productivity, it can be labour productivity, it can be machinery productivity, but there is a significant challenge around that for many units. There is also a skills challenge, because as technological sort of input to farming increases, it also demands a different set of skills from those that are running farms. And there's something around that we need to talk about as well. And lastly, and this is honest, it's probably not something that is revenue generating at the minute, but the whole aspect of environmental challenge, we are going to have to address, I suppose, waste from our farms. We're going to have to address any areas where efficiency improvements can be made, or where pollution can be controlled, and there are technologies around that as well, and we're going to have to give consideration to that type of technology too. But fundamentally, we can't do it all at once. That is very much the whole aspect that we need to consider, that we need to sequence inputs, and we need to choose what to do first, because no business can do it all at once. And that leads on into the next little bit, the real pressures on farming. Number one, really, the need to produce more food to meet world demand. Now, in reality, it's probably not going to be a problem for us in the UK. We don't probably have the same environmental challenges in one sense, or climate challenges that other countries do. But essentially, over the next 30 to 40 years, there's going to be a substantial reduction in the ability of many, many countries to actually supply what the population needs. And countries like our own, which are slightly more temperate, but are obviously going to be subject to, I suppose, some form of environmental warming over the next bit, we will become more productive. But we still need to meet the food to meet that world demand. The next one is really the need to impact less to meet national and international targets. So we've all heard about net zero, and all sorts of things like that there. And net zero doesn't really just apply to carbon. It applies to a lot of other pollutants and challenges as well. And fundamentally, actually, as farming becomes more productive, and I suppose even economically viable in that sense, it does actually per kilogram anyway of production impact the environment less, but we can do more. So that's going to be a really big pressure there. Um, Basically, I think anyway, we're going to have the issue over here where if we don't control a lot of the, as it were, the contaminants or pollution, it's actually going to inhibit our ability to expand business and might even stop some of our business going on. So technology needs to be able to address some of that as well. And fundamentally, I mean, we've all seen what's happened with COVID. We know there's going to be continual price pressure on consumers. The economy is not great, and there is going to be that increasing price pressure from consumers and retailers. So how do we do more and keep our costs down? Really key, and that's just that last bit, the need to increase productivity and profitability. And that, by the way, is not about every individual farmer working harder. It's absolutely not. There's very few lazy farmers about. It's about trying to use technology and knowledge wisely to make things better on all of our businesses. So the challenge of change, before we head into the real technology thing, it is difficult. Change is difficult. We're hardwired to resist change. But there's a number of reasons that really hold things back, different from different people. But sometimes one of the, I suppose, the most challenging is just not knowing what's best practice, what's best technology, how do I implement it? And in some sense, we're obviously preaching to the converted tonight, because you're on a seminar here, you're learning. You're probably not the target audience for that comment, if I'm honest with you, but it's still something that's true. One that's perhaps more true is that something's difficult to create a vision or to see where your business could be if you implemented a particular type of technology or practice. So trying to get a handle on, okay, I'm here now. If I did this in 5 years, it might be this. And that's something that's actually very helpful. Thirdly, there's this whole aspect of a lack of confidence. There's quite a few farmers don't implement a lot of change because they don't think of the ability or skills to implement the new practice effectively. And that's usually not true. Sometimes it is, but it's easy enough to pick up new skills. It's easy enough to learn things if you find the right advice. But that lack of confidence, it's key that you recognize as you look back over your business career in farming that you have implemented change, you've done things well, and you do have the skills to take on new things, even if it's a bit uncomfortable. And the last one really there is around a lack of measurement. And this is, again, a technology thing that's very, very key. Our farms, truthfully, and particularly livestock farms, beef and sheep in particular, have not made the progress they could make because the data calling levels in a lot of farms are not high enough. It means that farm benchmarking can't be carried out. Individual animal performance is not managed or recorded, and the farm manager then is unaware of those areas of low and high performance, whether that's total farm or whether it's individual animal, and therefore you can't make targeted changes effectively. So there's something really key around that, and there's a mentality thing around taking up technology. So very quickly then, the need for technology. Well, truth be told, and all of you know this, I mean, all of you are better farmers than your fathers or mothers were. You're doing more, you're producing more. Just judged on pure performance terms, you are ahead. And part of the reason for that is knowledge. Part of the reason is technology, and technological progress has always defined farming. And I'm going to show you a few wee photographs in a while on that. The most effective farms have always implemented new technology. They haven't run and put every single thing in. They've selected carefully, and they've used technology which shows promise, and they've used it properly on their farm. They've understood how to apply it, and they've done that. And in reality, I mean, if I had to break it down, this is a personal opinion, you might disagree, but I think that the real focus for me over the next bit is around labor productivity. How can one person or a small team do more? And technology is obviously a key answer to that. Second one is that improved physical performance and productivity per acre or per animal, reducing inputs, increasing outputs, reducing waste, targeting inputs, all that type of a thing is really very key. But the last one, and this is often missed, the technology can improve the marketability of your product by actually being able to record information and send it with the final product that actually appeals to the customer. So I talk about things like measuring welfare throughout life of the animal, microbial use right through. Technology can help with that and can actually create markets and add value. So something that's really key. Just a few photographs for you. Nobody about I would imagine now that farm fundamentally with horses, but if you look back in over a century, farming changed totally and completely. And I was smiling, even one of the Honda Trike there. I actually had one of those. I don't know how many times I crashed it, but that was a great help. But over time, you went to the four-wheeler, which was better. We've gone to all the sort of the mobile phones. Most of us remember the old Nokias. I think most of us are probably on iPhones or Samsungs that are very advanced now. And we're really heading not too far away from your robotic tractors or autonomous tractors, all driven by GPS, AI, 5G. And we're going to talk about that in a little minute. So farming has always actually taken up technology. And in doing this, we're just following a tradition. That I suppose those that have gone ahead of us have done. So what do we need to consider when implementing technology? And we are going to look at some technologies in a minute, but the first thing is this here. As I said to you at the very start, you can't do everything at once. Resources are finite. Skills are finite. Time is finite. And essentially, you want to improve and implement technology against a plan, and it should really ideally be done against measurement or data points. So understanding where farm is overperforming, ahead of its, those around it, and where it's underperforming, and then understanding where that underperformance is costing money, and then being able to work out, well, if that's the cost of that, and I did this, that is something that can actually improve or impact my farm. And I'm going to walk that through in a minute or two and just some of that decision making. But in my view, it's usually better to address areas of acute underperformance first, almost like a first limiting factor. What is holding my farm back? What is the single thing that is holding my farm back above all else? And if you can do something about that, then do it. If you can't do something about the first limiting, we'll move on to the second and try that. But in reality, you're wanting to identify maybe 5 key challenges in your farm, trying to put a monetary value or an environmental value or even a time value against that, and then say, right, I am going to plan to address that and then investigate it. The other thing is this, and it ties into what I've just said in a minute. The use of data is critical to ongoing farm improvement. So when we're talking about technology, we're not just talking about physical things here, which can actually, do work on the farm. Perhaps one of the most fundamental things is making data collection easier, sensor monitoring, easier ways of getting information coming to you to enable you to make better decisions. And that data is usually key in identifying those areas for improvement. There are sometimes things that are very, very obvious, where you've got a real time issue on a particular part of the farm because you haven't the equipment or the machinery to do something quickly. Well, that's obvious. You can do something about that, but usually the more subtle and actually the longer lasting and bigger things are data driven. So I'm going to challenge you that if you're not measuring effectively on your farm, it's worth doing as part of the basis of an ongoing improvement and technology plan. Measuring also helps you, or technically also helps you to measure the progress you've made. And when you find you've made progress, it encourages you to do more. But what it also does is allows cost benefit to be calculated, because often there's a temptation, if there's a bit of money available, put it into a new tractor because it's a very obvious benefit. It's nice to drive, all the rest of it. But actually, it might not be the thing that brings most profitability to your farm. And truth be told, profitability is going to be king over the next 4 to 5 years, with the cap regime changing, with the environmental pressures and the consumer pressures. In my opinion, data is the single most significant factor with potential to improve overall farms at the minute. It's not coincidence that poultry farming is probably the most efficient farming, followed by pork, and then I suppose dairy following after that, because actually fundamentally they have built their businesses on data and information collected. Another thing just to remember and consider is that often when a new technology comes along, people think, oh, it's going to save the world, it'll do this, it'll do that. And then some of the enthusiasts put it in, they find it doesn't have the effect they thought they had, and they go, well, that was a waste of time. And actually, there's a lot of scientific work out there that shows usually we overestimate the initial impact of technology by a bit, but we significantly underestimate the long-term effect of technology. So the truth is this here, when you're investing in technology, you're investing for the long term. You have to take maybe a 5-year view, maybe even a 10-year view, knowing that your investment is going to improve things over time. And that's very, very key. And just another thing to consider as well, whenever you're looking at the improvements that this technology will bring, would those improvements be finite or cumulative? So, and what I mean by that is that if you buy an automatic scraper system there, it delivers you a finite time saving, but that's it forever and ever. It's just going to be that time saving, and it won't change anything beyond that. Other things like investments in genetics are cumulative because you can build on them and build on them and build on them and build on them, and actually investing in good genetics means you're still benefiting maybe 5-10 years down the line. So it's worth just drawing that distinction between a finite benefit and a cumulative investment that actually will build and pay you back time and time and time again. I would say that those cumulative investments should usually be chosen in preference to finite investments. However, if you put a time-saving device in that allows you to plan or gives you more time to manage your farm, actually that time-saving device might be well worthwhile. So that's just a general thought for me. It's not an absolute total rule, so to speak. And just one other thing, really, before we look at slightly the cost benefits and then get into the technologies. Somebody said this to me one day, and it's absolutely right. Like, there's 3 levels of work on a farm. There's essentially mucking out a calf shed, which you can broadly is about a 10 or an hour job, where you can essentially probably pay somebody else to do it if you can get them. So that keeps the farm running, but that's its value is £10 an hour, and if you're the manager of the farm, is that where you should put in your time? Probably not. You then move on to perhaps something where you're managing animals, which is probably a 20 an hour job, where you're looking after you're doing the husbandry, you're doing bits and pieces there, maybe be lifting a bit of data. That's useful, it needs done, but again, it's not the most valuable piece of work on the farm. It needs done, the farm won't run without it, but fundamentally the most important job that returns the most value in the farm is that aspect of planning, looking at how the farm is performing, finding methods of addressing that, and that includes considering technology and implementing it. But fundamentally, profitability is driven by accurate decision making, and thought leadership is crucial because manual labor can be brought in, and that's probably 100 an hour job as opposed to £20 an hour. Now, if you sit in the office all the time and don't do any of the other work, well, there's a challenge there too. But what I'm trying to get there is the fundamental importance of that office work to plan and drive and develop your business. And it's exactly the same for my business too. Always looking for new customers is very key as well, because if I don't do that, my business will eventually stop. So both are absolutely necessary. I have to do the work, but I also have to look and plan ahead, and that's true for farming as well. So when we're considering technology, then there's 2 aspects here: this return on investment and cost benefit. This is how you would basically just consider working out, what would I spend my money on. And whatever you're looking at, there's usually an upfront cost. Maybe you'll buy it outright, or perhaps you'll finance it, but there's usually some kind of an upfront cost. But essentially, you need to put the upfront cost and the finance costs and any other costs, plus the cost of operating and maintaining that technology, against what you see as the financial benefits of that technology annually. And there's a number of other areas that can come into that as well. Does the product or the new technology actually add value to what you put off the farm? In which case you add that into the benefits. Are there costs saved with the new technology? You add that into the benefits. Does it save you time and allow you to do something else? You add that into the benefits. And then, fundamentally, does it allow management decision making time? And you have to make a bit of an assessment around that value. But fundamentally, all you're doing is taking lifetime costs of that technology versus lifetime return. And I know that sounds simple, but it would surprise you how many people don't do it. They buy from gut feel. And you can't really do that in the environment going forward. You know, whatever you invest in has to have impact. You know, so return on investment is critical to that decision making. And this is just a rule of thumb, you know, but I would consider the time period over which your investment is paid back. A technology, and you know, I would generally tend to consider an 18 to 30 month payback in that. Usually, investment in genetics, it'll pay back in probably in year one to a degree, but the real benefits are 5 years in the line. Buildings 15, 20 years. You know, so your time period and your repayments need to be calculated differently depending on the technology you're putting in. And the other thing that you have to consider at this point is what's the labor and training requirement to make this technology or practice work. And it's much better not to invest than to invest and then not implement anything, because that's just a waste of money. So that's sort of the whole preamble, and it's about half the presentation, so I apologize for that. But essentially, this is something that I think has to be said before you consider the types of technology. Now, again, I say at this point here, every farm is different, and this is why I haven't turned around and said, put this technology and do this technology. I will make some general sweeping statements at the end, but this is for you to consider. It's your business. You understand your business better than anybody else. But there are quite a range of different technologies that you can put in, and you'll see that in the report. Again, fundamentally, data collection and interpretation tools now abound, and they're going to become more and more of them. I mean, the report highlighted a lot of aspects of soil sensors, you know, and weather stations, GPS location, and for application of nutrients, for monitoring of growth, you know, all sorts of you know, drone applications as well, or robotic applications that allow that data collection, or even just static sensors. Other technology is pure labor saving, which is great. Other thing is things like machinery consolidation. Well, I can replace 2 or 3 vehicles if I have this machine. It's just process improvement, just something that obviously makes something better. And that might be as simple as just different nutrition, or it might actually be a milk machine for calves, which actually monitors every individual calf and, you know, tests health and, you know, applies different nutrients according to the sort of measured health of that animal. You know, it can be as complex as that or as simple as something else. Something that just purely improves performance is obvious. Perhaps some other ones are less obvious, but I think are important. Waste reduction or treatment to stop, for instance, runoff, soil loss, reduces pesticide application, anything like that, but also safety improvement. You know, farming and fishing are the 2 most dangerous occupations in the UK, and therefore an investment in safety is actually an investment in your business. It's an investment in your family as well, and it's not something just to be taken lightly. So that probably should form part of what you're considering as well. And lastly, environmental improvement. Now, most of that is not technology, if I'm being honest with you. There's one particular technology which is very interesting on that, it's LiDAR, but no individual farm would do that. But you might invest in a survey, or you might invest in tree planting, or, you know, riparian strips, or you might invest in just monitoring water flows over your farm. That's the type of thing I'm talking about. And certainly if you have questions, we can deal with that later on. I'm involved in a project with Queen's University at the minute, sort of managing that, and we're applying an awful lot of that type of practical, you know, implementation on farm that allows you to continue farming, but just reduces impact. So going on to the actual technologies then, these are the type of things to consider. I think if you ask me fundamentally what I would encourage everybody to do, it would be lift more information first, because that will steer the rest of your investment. And there's a whole range of technologies in this. You know, you can obviously use your phone to collect and process. There's a lot of, you know, obviously farm software stuff like the likes of Farm Plan, but then the newer versions really coming through, things like Breeder and AgriWebb and things, which are doing an awful lot in addition to what the traditional farm management programs would have done. They're sort of monitoring performance, giving you alerts, measuring antibiotic use, measuring grass growth, all sorts of things. So getting something in that actually can handle the data that you're going to collect is probably one of the priorities for your farm. And as I said, poultry and pork have been very good at this, and dairy has been generally good. But do not underestimate the impact for the average beef and sheep farm. Just a wee obvious thing there as well, you know, things like trailed rising plate meters. As you drive out to look cattle or sheep on fields, you can actually pick up quite a lot of data from that. They can go on ATVs. There's also obviously satellite mapping of land biomass, which can, you know, and that's just a subscription program that you can bring in that will monitor your grass growth for you. It's not always completely accurate because you know, I don't know about you, but it rains sometimes in Ireland, and it might do in Wales as well. But you know, the clouds do tend to actually hamper that a wee bit at times. But the technology is still good, and it allows you to manage your grass effectively. So there's an awful lot of that type of technology that can help you to manage your farm. But what I will say is this here: the collection of data enables the use of precision technology, and that precision technology can be applied to feeding of animals, but also perhaps more important things like fertilizer or pesticide applications, but also genomics and genetics are really informed as well by data collection. So I would say on a lot of farms, this is the single biggest limiting factor that you need to consider. So you know, consideration number one is always data. The second one then is labor saving, and again, there's always a number of reasons for looking at this type of thing, but perhaps one of the most important things for looking at you know, this is that it can allow you the expansion of your farm. You can do more without having to have additional labor on the farm, which is not always available. It can also enable you, I suppose, to basically reduce your input of time and allow you to have more management time to enable that higher level decision making that we talked about earlier on. And basically, it should allow you to collect more data as well. And I know this probably isn't a particularly fun topic, but what this also does is it allows older farmers to continue farming. And as we know, the age of farming is rising. And essentially, labor saving technologies are always worthwhile if you're finding that something is a particular struggle, because take that struggle away, you know, things get a bit easier and everything else improves. But there's a whole range of things, and you can see here, you know, from the mobile sheep crush. Again, I know that can be dear, but getting those type of things in with full weighing and monitoring equipment on them can transform how you manage your farm. Bigger farms, and I've seen, you know, basically the self-propelled feeder wagons, you know, you can lose a tractor there. They tend to keep the face of the silage much neater. They're far more precise in how they measure and use ingredients. And for a bigger farm, something like that there that can be operated by one person who's not having to jump up and down between different bits of machinery, and is doing a neater job with the face and just saving time. You know, one of those on a big unit can save time maybe by 30% and drop off the cost of another tractor and sort of loading machine as well. So those type of things are worth considering, because there's both a saving in terms of machinery, but there's also performance advantage because your silage and things is kept much better. Little things like this work very well, and I'm quite a fan of things like robotic pushers and things, because they can save an hour or two of work a day. They're not terribly complex, so they don't go wrong that often. And they just work. So they're one of those nice things that just work. Other things like your robotic parlor, again, that is not a replacement for labor. It just shifts the labor elsewhere to more management than anything else. But you know, again, something like a robotic parlor, because it's such a big investment, needs a very clear cost plan around it. And I know some who have gone for it, and some who've gone back to traditional, not back to traditional parlor, but have decided to put another traditional parlor in instead of robotics. Very much depends on your farm. And it very much depends on your aptitude for using the information that comes out of the robotics. My own personal view is there's so much information contained in this machine that if you're prepared to use it, it's worth the investment. But if you don't make yourself au fait with all the information that's coming through and use it to manage, you know, there's question marks over whether it is worthwhile or not. And very often when you invest in technology, it's how well you use it that defines whether it's actually a benefit to your farm or not. Other things like for pigs there, like automatic weighers, automatic sorters, takes a lot of stress out of the pigs, and you're not running on night sorting them. You've got a data flow coming constantly. You can monitor the effects, the immediate effects of nutrition changes if necessary, or any health impacts. So there's a huge thing around that labor piece, and that also enables one person to farm much more. This, however, is where a lot of the new developments are at, and I would ask you to give this one sort of reasonably good consideration. As I've said, data is really, really important, but sometimes it's very difficult to collect. But that's not going to be the case in the same to the same degree in the future. There's a lot of sensors, can measure, soil moisture, crop growth, animal health, reaction to, or basically just machinery performance, all sorts of things along that there. And what that does is it actually enables data flow without any effort from yourself. If I was to say you go out and measure all the welfare of your animals and write it all down, it would take you an awfully long time, and it would get in the way of the day-to-day tasks. Now, you might still argue it's worth doing, and I would actually, but the truth is, if you can get that easily to you, it would make such a difference. But that sensor technology enables automation to be put in place, because as soon as there's a data flow, an automatic or machine or a robot can do something with that. It enables real-time monitoring of performance. You can have obviously heat detection, Wi-Fi enabled heat detection on animals. It gives you very precise times of what is happening, and it enables monitoring of performance points that you normally wouldn't measure. And particularly arable farms can get benefit from things like soil moisture measures and things like that there, and that's going to become more a challenge over the next number of years as the climate changes again. But here's the other thing. Sensor technology, again, works in conjunction with other technology for maximum effectiveness. So drones can use it, works with GPS, with recording software, and actually most fundamentally with artificial intelligence. And I'll talk about that very shortly. Just very quickly, location technology is crucial in my opinion. That actually, again, one of the biggest things that you can do, you can actually get a robotic soil analyzer, but getting that soil analyzed and geolocated with a GPS point on it allows you to apply nutrients very appropriately on your farm, reducing waste, reducing your costs, and increasing response, whether that's grass response or actual crop response. They have a huge implication, but in my opinion, they come behind some of the other technologies. Again, go back to doing your data collection first, and then managing against that, and then geolocating it is very helpful. However, because it's so easy to do now, it's maybe something that's worth considering if you're doing other work in conjunction with that. But just getting on to really where we're coming and going to really in farming. With all those sensors, robotics are then going to become very important to different aspects of farming. They're probably going to become more prevalent in top fruit, vegetable farming first, or at least more dominant there. But they will certainly flow quite quickly into all the other sectors as well. And essentially, there are some basic robotics in place at the minute, but video technology and 5G is crucial to effective implementation, which is why you need 5G for farming. Because as soon as you've got 5G, you are able to use video technology effectively. You can get information straight up to your server and back down to interpret it, and then apply essentially then intelligence to how the machine responds. So the easiest way to look at that is that, well, I mean, for instance, this one on fruit picking, trying to decide whether or not something is ripe, actually is incredibly complex. But actually, 5G can really enable that to be done quite quickly. Obviously that's not necessarily totally applicable to the hill farms in Wales, but the actual technology that will come out of that is then linked into drones and things where you're able to measure, for instance, animal health from drones. And a drone can scout your farm and monitor animals and interpret what it's seeing and feed back information on that. And 5G is so key to that as well. What I will say is mobile robotics are currently at early stages of implementation, but inside I'd say 20 years, they're going to be fairly ubiquitous. It'll start relatively small, as I imagine it did whenever tractors first come in, but it'll build quite quickly, and it will be driven by 5G. And again, it's the same with drone technology. They've got a hugely wide range of application already, but as soon as that AI and video tech becomes more available, again, it just increases the range of application of everything that can be done on your farm. And I mean, I would suggest that on livestock farms, drones, particularly upland farms, are going to be absolutely crucial, because the range of stuff they'll be able to do, monitoring grass growth remotely. You can find out where your good fields and your bad fields are, where the bad areas and the good areas are. Monitoring, animal grazing patterns, monitoring animal health, identifying whenever there is some kind of a disease challenge, and alerting you probably 4 days or 3 days before you would actually see it clinically. Basically, also going around and actually maybe spot weeding, finding out, well, they're just spotting bits that shouldn't be in fields. Maybe also going around, and I see this coming as well, whenever we get into having to prove public goods, public money for public goods, monitoring the level of hedgerow cover on your farm, looking for areas which are actually of benefit to the environment, and actually you being able to prove to your customer that you are on top of your game. So drone technology, in my mind, and particularly automated drone technology, is going to be, I think it's going to be transformational over the next few years, perhaps in the same way that ATVs were transformational for hill farms maybe 30, 40 years ago. And ultimately, we're going to end up with farms that look essentially like this, where you have a farmer who is a businessman and a manager. And I know that won't appeal to everything, but it's critical that you have a mindset that you are going to be actually making a lot of decisions is based on numbers. And it's not a challenge once you're in the way of that, but there will be sensors all over the farm. And you will get a flow of information that allows you to manage better than you ever have done before. And it will both help you manage your farm and sell to your customers. So what I would say is, if you're going to pick something up, as I've mentioned the data bit, if you're good with your data, your next bit is really starting to get a handle on sort of drone technology and robotics and sensors, where they might be applied in your farm, because perhaps more than anything else, they will drive what you're doing. Safety tech, just to say, do not ignore this. Things like, that's a mixture there that can actually mix through the slats. Soft rollover bars for ATVs. Basically, even there's sorts of maintenance stuff and things around tractors and all. But here we have things like your carbon monoxide and your slurry gas, your hydrogen sulfide monitors. I think any livestock farm should have one of those. We've seen too many deaths, and those type of technologies are they're very simple, but they could save your life. Just moving on really to the sort of final area of technology, and we're nearly at the end of the presentation now. But I think environmental technology is going to be critical. It's going to be driven by future agricultural policy. There's less emphasis on you having to implement it or retrofit it now. I know if you're, for instance, putting a chicken house in or a pig unit into your farm, you will have to do some of this, whether it's just scrubbers or whether it's other sort of air monitors and things. That's already in. But I think over the next 10 to 15 years, it's going to become ubiquitous. And our farms will be monitored and they will be sending data back. But I do think actually farming will be paid for good behavior and good performance. So I wouldn't see this as a threat, but obviously if we're underperforming, it is a threat, and we need to be well aware of it. So there are a lot of environmental technologies out there that can make a difference as well. And actually what I would say is some of those bring great benefits inside a house. I mean, you're all aware of the challenge that ammonia brings to calves and things like that there. Keeping, monitoring air quality inside and outside of buildings is something that can bring performance benefits on farm at the minute as well. But lastly, we're down to the decision making now, and we've just a few slides left before we go to the questions. But again, I am repeating a little what I said earlier, but I think it bears emphasis, if that's okay. Decision making should be based on evidence and not feel. Look, and I'll give you one of the best examples I ever heard of that. Is that I was talking to somebody one day who had never really linked lambs to ewes and hadn't really measured individual animal performance. And they did it 1 year, and what was quite interesting was they had been selecting quite a range of ewes for breeding in the next season at the end of the last season based on their fitness. And then we're keeping them in the flock. And what they actually found when they started doing records was the reason that those ewes looked fit was because actually they'd either killed their lamb or hadn't had a lamb at all. So they're actually bringing in fertility into the flock, basically by just going by eye. And that's fairly fundamental in my mind. That actually our eye isn't always right, but data is much more obviously correct at times. Not always, but it usually is. The other thing you have to ask yourself the question is, why am I trying to put this technology in? Is it because I just want it, or do I need it, or is it actually the most important thing that I can do? Somebody has said to me several times, the good is the enemy of the best. And I know it sounds a bit trite, but it's right. That actually, you can invest in something that's pretty good for your farm, but actually you could perhaps invest in something else instead, which might actually give you 40-50% better performance again. So, it's always worth asking, what should I invest in first? The thing I would say is that there is a hierarchy of improvements that can be identified on farm. And usually I would suggest if it's a safety issue, you sort that out first. If it's a welfare issue, you sort it out second. And then you start to work down the economic benefits. So safety first, welfare second, and then moving on from there down then via an economic route. But you address the most pressing need first. A few questions you can ask for yourself. Firstly, is this investment necessary for business continuity? And certainly a number of years ago over here, I know quite a number of dairy farmers went out because there was going to be, because we went in a nitrate vulnerable zone, we had to invest in a lot more tanks. And a lot of people were coming to the end of career and going, well, I don't want to invest 150,000 in another tank and never pay it off. So we'll just stop. But if you want to keep the business going, it was necessary to do that. So investment one, is it necessary for business continuity? And that might be the case, say, for a pig unit, which has a challenge around, say, smell, odor, and that type of thing. To continue, maybe that would need to be sorted. Second thing is the investment necessary for profitability. And if the answer to that is yes, it's on to measuring that cost benefit we talked about. Also, is it a need or is it a want? And obviously, quite important at the end, can I afford it? And actually, perhaps more importantly, and a lot of farms, that are actually focused on saving money and controlling costs. Controlling costs isn't always the best way to make money. It's a short-term fix a lot of the time. The question you have to ask yourself at times, and particularly around a lot of these sensor technologies and data collection, can I afford not to? And in my mind, that's a very significant challenge to many. Can you afford not to do it? It might be scary, but can you afford not to do it? And I face that in my business all the time, taking on staff and things like that there. Again, it's another wee bit of a risk. Can I afford to pay them? Can we make this work? But then when you realize that the skills that they bring that I just don't have, the question then becomes, actually, can I do without them? And quite often the answer is no. And therefore I have to go with the investment. So we're down now to the last slide, and I just want to flag this for you because it's too easy to get all excited about, oh, put this technology in and all the rest of it. But have you considered what you need to be able to do to make it work? You're better choosing a technology that you will be able to make work, even if in theory it'll deliver slightly less benefit than something else that you won't use. So something really important. So what skills are needed? What skills do you have? What training do I need? And in truth, probably most of us need training on a lot of things. I do employ mentors in my business to actually help me walk through different things that I don't understand or I'm not good enough at. And that's true in any business. We're not all good at everything. So do you have the time to train? If you need to. And lastly there, that effective use of technology is critical. I'm sorry, there's one more slide and that's it there. Just that hierarchy of improvements. Consider what it will do for your business. Does it enable you to have more management time? Does it give you more information? Does it allow you to control your inputs and outputs? Does it allow you to improve your genetics or choose how to do that? And does it structurally improve the business? That isn't a solid list in terms of every one of those, but they are the things that you should consider. And sorry, I'll finish there. I know I'm a bit over time, Tristan, sorry, but there was a bit on that.
Not to worry at all, Jonathan. Thank you very much for the very enjoyable presentation. I found it very thought-provoking, as I'm sure our viewers did as well. Just to remind our viewers, before I move on to the first question, if you would like to ask a question and would like Jonathan to answer, then please type the questions into the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens, and I'll read them out. So just moving on to the first question, Jonathan. Farms are often multi-generational. What would you say to the more resistant or reluctant generation to help them get on board with implementing technology? I can see the grass is growing. Why do I need a piece of equipment to tell me what I can see, for example?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. So it is, and it's sometimes it's actually breaking down why people are resistant change at first. Sometimes it's just a question of actually being able to show somebody the actual benefits. But more often than not, the resistance actually comes from the fact that people feel they're getting outmoded or made out of date, because all the technology has gone past me, and there's a reluctance really to actually absorb the technology. So the question really isn't a lot of the time around the farmer or sort of the older generation going, actually, no, this isn't a good idea. It's actually a fear that they won't be able to use it. So I think there's two things there. Number one, you got to do your figures first. So if the data shows, you know, that you can improve your farm, you think you can improve your farm, it's probably worth going to another farm for a bit of a look that has done it before. Say, okay, how did you do this? What was the effect? And take the person with you to see that. So you see it in operation. Seeing's often believing. And then I think the other thing is just walking through how the technology would be used, and showing how it would be implemented, and either to give the older generation confidence that the younger generation will use it and make it work, and we're not just wasting money, or actually this is so simple you can use it, and with a little bit of effort, in 6 weeks' time you'll be using this, and you'll wish you'd always used it. And so I think there's two questions to answer there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jonathan. I think that's a great point. It's sort of the ripple effect, isn't it? If your neighbour gets a piece of kit or a new piece of equipment, and you see it working well, then you're more likely to purchase it as well, I think, aren't you?
Yeah.
Do you think as these technologies achieve economy of scale, as it were, in terms of production and sales, will they become cheaper over time generally now, as has happened with household technology such as dishwashers and all of that?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about it. I think it is. I think the capabilities will go up, and I think one of the other really traditional aspects of farm technology, which has been appalling, to be quite frank, has everybody has designed their own software, piece of software. Everybody's done their own thing. And there's going to be a lot of focus over the next few years on making things simpler to use, better user interfaces, that actually that they will actually talk to other bits of equipment. I mean, the obvious thing is that actually, you know, a John Deere baler won't talk to a Fendt tractor. It's ridiculous, but that's true. And that it's just an absolute pain in the bottom for people, because then, you know, most of us, when we're doing something, you know, I don't know if you're like me, but if I'm using a computer and there's a 1 second delay on it, it drives me mad. You know, and you just want it to work, and you don't want to have to go and sort a problem out to make it work properly. And I think that's been one of the challenges with technology, which I think is being resolved. You know, electronics are so much more reliable. Interoperability will be better. They'll be simpler to use, and I suppose fundamentally, with that sort of simplicity and reliability comes just the reduced cost, because people will take them up more as they get more reliable and more simple to use. Therefore, the costs just come down for the manufacturer, and yes, you will then see an awful lot of stuff being dropped down in price and reduced.
Thank you, Jonathan. Is it fair to say that your larger farms would be the early adopters of new technologies? And why is that? If that's the case, why is it? Do you think it's down to that they have more data to hand, as you mentioned, whereas your average smaller beef and sheep farm have less data? Is it solely down to that, or?
I think there's a number of reasons for it. I think the first thing is that probably labour is usually a challenge on a bigger farm, but a bigger farm also has 2 or 3 people with a different skill set. I mean, one of the challenges with a smaller farm is that you have to be everything. And that's what I find even starting my business. I'm sort of at about a 5-person business now. I started a 1-person business and I had to do everything. And I hated it because I'm rubbish at quite a lot of stuff. And that's true in a farm as well. Nobody's good at everything. Therefore, on a bigger farm, generally speaking, there's 2 or 3 workers as well. And every one of them has a different gift. And you can actually then get different people to do different things. And therefore, it's easier to put technology in. There's always somebody to provide a bit of support. I think the second thing as well with a bigger farm, you just got more animals or more production to divide the cost of that technology over. And if I'm honest with you, and this is a more controversial one, so I'm glad this is remote, but often the farms get bigger because people actually have a better attitude and have already taken up technology. So what I would say is that it's, if you took an average, bigger farms have more technology, but I've seen some superb small farms that are using technology and just working things out in a different way, just getting massively high production from small areas because they're using effective technology. So there's a lot about attitude in it, but there's also a lot about having a couple of people about that will actually provide help and support.
Yeah. Well, we're on this topic. I'd just like to remind the viewers that a number of our demonstration farms have already adopted quite innovative and new technologies such as smart boluses, your LoRaWAN sensors, your GPS field mapping and variable rate spreading and so forth. So if you'd like to get some more information about what's been going on our demonstration sites, then visit our website and have a look at the recent webinars from our Demo Farm Live events, where there's a great example of what's been implemented and used on farm at the moment. Yeah. What inventions or technologies do you think will have the biggest effect, or the biggest will have the most change to Welsh farming over the next 10 to 15 years?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the one that could potentially have the biggest effect are just technologies that enable data collection. So farm performance monitoring. So that's sensor technologies all around. So let's be honest, 2 things. If you did your soil analysis every year, probably, at a reasonably, I'm trying to suggest, probably one sample every 2 hectares or every other hectare with a W pattern across those fields and GPS located. So you actually know broadly where your land's at. I think that will have tried to transformational, effect on sort of grass performance and things like that. Also going back the other way and measuring just animal performance, picking up some, those farm software things and using them properly, along with EID tags, linking of tag of calves and lambs to use and the dams. Those type of technologies are actually transformational, but they're already there. So that's going to be quite key. I think if you go into the more complex technologies, drone technology and with 5G is just absolutely going to transform. In the same way, hill farming years ago, when the ATV came along, you're fit to get right round, roam right the farm. It changed the way people manage the area they could manage. Drone technology is going to do that, particularly on big, extensive farms. But it will also allow, I would imagine, easier management of even farms that aren't necessarily in blocks. So I think when we get to sort of automatic drones, automatic recording, I think you'll find that is utterly transformational as well. And the last one is basically the price of genomic analysis is coming down because of laboratory tech and making breeding decisions. Particularly, if you're a suckler cow producer, you're going to be under pressure. The truth is, you've got to select your best suckler cows, not just the sires. So using genomic technology, even though it's 30 quid an animal or 40 quid an animal, on your dams to select your dams is going to be it'll pay dividends in the long run. Like if you have a suckler cow for 10 years and that gives you a benefit of 60, 70, 80, 90 quid a year just by proper genomic selection, that it fairly offsets the one-off £40 payment. So there's 3 or 4, but it just depends on your farm.
Yeah, definitely. I'd agree with that. Yeah, the final question now then. Where's the best place for viewers to go to find out about new technologies and inventions? Obviously, the Farming Connect website is a good place to start, but are there any more sources of information where our viewers can go and have a look?
Yeah, that's probably a good question, because I went looking when I was in the report. I went looking at an awful lot of places, and it took an awful lot of time. I think that the first thing is what you mentioned earlier, is your demonstration farms first. They're absolutely critical. It's always lovely, and the thing with demonstration farms is usually the people running them are quite happy to admit where they got it wrong as well, which is always encouraging, it has to be said. And actually this technology didn't work. So the first place I would start are things like those advanced farms. I think a lot of the media is quite good, farming media is quite good at showing case studies of technologies that are advanced. And I think it's just about being intentional. There's a lovely word there, it doesn't just, we come across it accidentally. It's actually, you actively go out and look for new tech. It is there and findable across a number of different websites. Like SRUC put a lot of stuff out, AFBI put a lot of stuff. There's a lot of those colleges. Harper Adams are exceptionally good at it. But can I be honest with you, if you just go out there and say I want tech, it's almost overwhelming. And it's hard, even with a presentation like this. You could just talk all night. I mean, there's probably about a tenth of what I looked at in that presentation tonight. But the truth is this here: find out what the problem is in your farm and look for the technology that's going to solve that in that area. So where's your first one or two limiting factors? And that's where I would start, and then solve that problem and then move on. And I think that's more important than anything else, is knowing where your challenge is, because everybody has one. We like to think we don't, but we do.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much, Jonathan. And on that point, I think we'll call it tonight. So thank you very much for joining us. Really enjoyed your presentation and found it thoroughly interesting.